All right, I'll call to order the Town of Mount Desert Planning Board meeting for January 22nd, 2025. Welcome aboard. So I'll kick it off with some introductions. Myself, I'm William Hanley, Chair. We've got Vice Chair Tracy Loftus-Keller, Gail Marshall, and Alan Kimmerly. I believe Ann Dalton is coming. She's just going to be a little late. And we've got people here in the audience, the C Street meeting room, and then we've got some folks online. And I would kindly ask, if you are online, please sign in on chat. Just type your name, please, first and last name. Todd. So that would be greatly appreciated. And let's get going with the agenda here. So first or second item on the agenda tonight is the approval of minutes. We've got the minutes from our January 8th hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we've got our minutes approved and we're soldiering on to item 3, and that happens to be other. And other tonight is an update from the Land Use Zoning Ordinance Advisory Group. And we've got Noel Musson here tonight. And Noel, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Tonight, basically, the agenda for tonight was to give the planning board an update on some of the proposed or of the proposed land use ordinance changes that the Luso committee's been working on that will potentially get proposed for the town meeting in May. And we have a public hearing for these scheduled for February, the next planning board meeting, February 12th. So this year, there's really, I'm going to say 4 or 5 articles, and tonight we're going to talk about them generally, and then between now and sort of the end of this month, I have to tighten up these articles. Kim and I have a meeting with Andy Hamilton tomorrow, where we're going to go over them, but I wanted to come to the board and talk about them, so they'll just get after it.
Sounds good.
Right, so the first one, we're still gonna talk about it, but there's a potential change coming your way, related to. Just a clarification on what structures require certificates of occupancy, and I'll keep that one. And we aren't sure how this is gonna shake out, because Kim noticed the other day that there was a date. That's different than this date that we have here in this draft. But I'm giving it to you anyway, since I haven't had a chance to clarify anything since yesterday, when we found out about it, but generally, this change is just to propose to clarify what structures, what the date of a structure would be by which you'd have to have a certificate of occupancy, which currently is not in the ordinance.
Yeah, just a little background on this. I always thought that any structure permitted that required human habitation or living area required a certificate of occupancy if the permit was issued in 1998 and after. Because I went back and looked at the building codes for the town of Mount Desert, and I swear I saw 1998, but last week I looked at the 1970 building code that was adopted by the town, and the certificate of occupancy language within that building code at that point. So that ideally is saying any building for human habitation or living area would require an occupancy if it was issued in 1970. I don't know if there were no standards to require, you know, what would require certificate occupancies. It just said that apply with the underwriters, fire association. I'm like, I don't know what that means, so. In 1998, it talks about. The 1997. NFPA 101 life safety codes, so at least those had standards of what required. An occupancy, so that's why I thought it was 98. So we gotta determine with Andy Hamilton. What year to put, because we actually, the building code now is obsolete, it's not. Code anymore, because the state of Maine has adopted the Maine Uniform Building and Energy Codes, and that is the only building code that's in effect statewide. You can't have any other building code that you may have had prior to when the state of Maine adopted UBEC. So what we did last year at town meeting was took the language from the building code and put it into the land use zoning ordinance. And that includes different occupancy language. So I was brainstorming, saying, okay, well, we did that, but now does that mean that certificate occupancies now are required from 2024? Because that's when we added it to the ordinance. So we got a lot of dates that I need clarification on. But that, in a nutshell, that is kind of where this all came down.
So it's defined by date, not and habitation.
Not structure, no, it's by what date does the town of Mount Desert want certificate of occupancies to have been required?
Mhm.
What year does that start?
And this matters in large part when you want to transfer the property?
Well, a lot of times, real estate agents will research the files, and if there's no occupancy in there. They've got to disclose that, but also technically, the people should not be habitating their buildings without an occupancy.
Hmm.
And it's up to the homeowners and or the contractors to notify the town once the building's complete.
But nothing changes like. If there isn't habitation present, meaning like garages or barns or.
Garages don't require, no, it's living, it's what you're gonna,
Mhm.
habitation is your living area, your bedrooms, your
Mhm.
living, your office space, anything except for storage, kitchen and bathrooms.
Mhm.
Do you think that this might create a situation where we want to, there's language in here saying. Occupancy without written approval, blah, blah. Do you think introducing this concept at this point might give rise to a need to have some sort of grace period for people to clear up the fact that we talked last night about the fact that a lot of people don't even realize that they're supposed to have an occupancy. We don't want to be in a position where we're issuing $500,000 fines to,
Yeah, no, I don't know how that's gonna work.
yeah.
Like I said, the building permit application states certificate of occupancy, yes or no, and
Mhm.
it's checked,
Mhm.
whether it requires one or not.
Right.
I don't know, that's something we gotta ask Andy.
Right.
There's a lot of buildings out there that people are occupying even after 98, that of the year that and in the past, I have written letters to the property owner stating, what's the status on
Right.
completion of your building?
Right,
But I haven't been able to follow through with them anymore because I'm too busy.
right.
So, but the onus is also on the owners and the contractors to make sure they contact the
Circle
town.
back.
I don't know, we gotta talk to Andy.
Okay, so we're talking to Andy and we may get it organized before but that's the purpose of it. So if anybody.
I've always been curious, is there like a timer that goes off with the filing of a construction permit that says, hey, Kim, check on the
Status.
occupancy permit or status?
Well, no, because a building permit once issued. If it requires an occupancy. It just states that the building permit is good for 1 year from the date it's issued, provided the foundation has been installed. Within 1 year from the date of issuance. After that, the permit does not expire.
Mhm.
If they don't get the foundation, then they gotta reapply. Maybe there should be a time limit, I don't know, But it's, see, but you don't know what you run into with construction.
Yeah.
Like especially with, when COVID hit, a lot of people had to wait weeks for windows
Yeah.
and contractors were hard to come by because they're so busy. I mean, it's,
We had multiple projects go from like 14, 16 month build times to 30, 33 month
Yeah.
build times. and
Yeah.
I was. Yeah.
Has that eased at all? I don't imagine it has.
And it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
it.
no, there's a lot of contractors.
Yeah.
I've heard of built, till this year or maybe even next year, and this was 2020, 2021.
That's
Okay.
it, that's an interesting one.
It is,
Mhm,
I'm stumped.
mhm.
Okay,
You think it's gonna be easy.
No. Nothing's easy.
What else you got, Noel?
all right. The next one, we're gonna talk about is a potential clarification to footnote G in the table of, the dimensional standards table. 3.5 related to shoreline commercial, property. So currently in the ordinance, as you're all familiar with, the shoreland commercial district does allow for the property owner to have a resident, to make it a principal residential use, according to footnote G. And, I guess there was a application that was before the board where the question was which district, can we, whether or not you can include, whether or not that footnote allows you to use the upland residential district, or it has to be the adjacent shoreline residential district. And so this change just adds the word shoreland to clarify that when you're doing when you're changing your shoreline commercial district to be a principal residential use, then you have to use the dimensional standards of the adjacent shoreline residential district. Not the,
You remember this one?
not the upland
I didn't.
district.
Remind me.
There was a property that came before you where somebody was looking to get a piece of land. And they wanted to use the upland zoning district dimensional requirements, minimum lot area. And the property in question is completely within 250 feet of the highest end tide, so. You have to, and so the inland zoning district obviously doesn't have shore frontage, it's a residential district. So create a lot that's within 250 feet on a water body, you have to meet the dimensional requirements for the shoreline zone.
Mhm.
So it states that you have to meet the adjacent residential, shoreline, no, residential district. So shoreline residential obviously is the adjacent residential district because it's along the shore. It's shoreline zone, it's got water frontage, so you have to meet that zone, and you can't meet the inland zone. And so we're adding the word shoreline.
So it's, I think to clarify, it's always been interpreted this way, we're just adding the word to make it crystal clear.
Mhm.
We did have a brief kind of policy query about, and it's probably not for this phase, about the wisdom of allowing people to build residences in a shoreline commercial district, given that shoreline commercial districts are there for a reason, because it's hard to get commercial space on the shore. And does this undercut the policy for having a shoreline commercial district by allowing it to be infilled with residences? That seemed to be out of our portfolio, but it might be something we want to think about in a larger context, like get the comprehensive plan or something like that. What do we want shoreline commercial to be used for?
Mhm.
Is that, what's the need for shoreline commercial versus other uses? And the wishes of the community.
Residential is a allowable use in shoreline commercial.
Well, under this footnote.
Under this
Yeah.
footnote it is, and the question is, the logic question is, should it be?
Well,
But it has been.
so I think the larger question is to what how can you integrate residential uses and still maintain the primary purpose of the shoreline commercial district, like in shoreline zoning, the reason that you designate shoreline commercial districts is to protect the commercial availability of shoreline, and if you think about, what's the highest and best use from a real estate perspective, I guess, of land along the shoreline, it isn't always a commercial use, so many communities are designating, or, with the state shoreline zoning, asks communities to designate those areas that they want to protect for that purpose. And I think it would be, it's an interesting question, a policy question for the town to say, okay, is this footnote really helping us do that? Or are there better ways are there other standards that we might put in place where, residential uses might be allowed, but not to the primary detriment of the commercial aspect? Like, you can integrate residential uses in a commercial setting, but you just have to do it the right way.
Read what the definition of shoreline commercial in your ordinance is. Under section 2.
And side note, Ronnie and Rebecca, could you just please sign in on chat? It helps Heidi with the minutes. Thank you.
But doesn't say anything about residential.
That's it.
Hey.
What's it say?
It just says areas allocated to marine activities which are dependent on shore access.
So that's what you intended use of shoreline.
Yeah.
commercial.
Hello. So, I mean, it's not that this is not the question of
Correct.
this particular ordinance, it just prompted the question
Right.
for future consideration.
Got it.
And it may be a good thing to bring up to comp plan.
Yep.
Any questions on that?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. All right.
That'll change.
You wanna-
Well, now we're getting into it.
That'll change.
Should we give Ann just a quick summary of where we're at? So we're on our second proposed warrant article. The first one was about the dating of certificates of occupancy for permitting. And then the second one was just a clarification, adding of the word shoreline for adjacent zoning for shoreline commercial lots that are looked at to be used for residential use. We had something before the board where they wanted to use the upland standard, and the upland standard was a zone that was completely non-shoreline zoned, so we're adding the word.
Just to clarify.
And the first one is still in limbo because Kim is discovering new things about the effective date in our prior ordinances of when occupancy permits are required, so it's something she's continuing to work on.
I think it's safe to say that for that one, we're going back to the town attorney to figure out how to write it so that there is a date by which homes are supposed to have a certificate of occupancy, and right before that, we just haven't figured out the date.
2024.
2025, January. But maybe that's what it is. I mean, it's a policy choice for the town, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so the warrant article proposal that I just handed out is to add standards to the land use ordinance for solar energy systems. And so I'm gonna give you the spiel on it and we can talk about it. So what this does is basically creates, a few things. It actually creates a new thing in the ordinance called solar energy systems, which is essentially like solar panels, and then it defines. A couple of different kinds, so there's the roof mounted solar energy systems. And then there's ground mounted solar energy systems. And then ground mounted solar energy systems are also classified in terms of their size. So technically, there are 3 sizes of solar energy systems. The first one is a small scale. Second one is a medium scale, and the third one is a large scale. And so there's a size limit to each one of those in the definition section of the ordinance. And then.
And the large isn't allowed in any,
I'm giving for that.
okay, so.
Yep, and so under the table of allowed uses, we've added those solar energy systems, and you'll see on the second page that roof mounted solar energy systems are allowed. Small scale ground mounted solar energy systems are allowed, medium, and those are allowed with, so roof mounted solar energy systems are going to be allowed without a permit. Small scale solar energy systems are allowed with a permit from the code enforcement officer. Medium scale solar energy systems are allowed with a conditional use approval from the planning board. And large scale solar energy systems are not allowed anywhere. And then, of course, 3.5 just says, here's where all of these solar energy systems are allowed, which zones, which districts they're allowed in. And then it adds a new section under 6B, 6B23 that talks about the standards by which you have to apply, or that you have to apply when you're trying to do solar energy systems. There's also some standards in there that relate to if you're doing the medium scale, you're coming to the planning board. These are the application material requirements that are kind of above and beyond what you would normally do, or just to clarify that. And then there's some standards in there about then how you would remove a solar energy system if it gets abandoned, what you're supposed to do. And then there's definitions for all of those at the end.
So you do have to go to the last page to see what qualifies as small, medium, and large.
Yes, and that is just a function of the way the ordinance is structured. We also added the, solar energy, the roof mounted ones, in order for them to be kind of exempt from building permits, we just added that to the definition of height. Sort of like a antenna. Probably flat.
Whatever they claim.
Right.
Solar.
Yeah. So we can go over all of that, if you want, all of the standards, but basically there was some initiative, at the sustainability committee to do this, and I know the town is working with the Climate to Thrive on a bunch of different things, on some things. And so this was kind of kicked up, as something that was probably necessary, probably late last year, in the Luso cycle. Climate to Thrive actually worked on a draft of some standards, which was actually based on something that Maine Audubon has done. So there's like model ordinances out there, and we're using. And then I took both of those things and massaged it a little bit to plug it into the structure of our ordinance. And so most of these standards aren't things that we just made up; they're pretty standard stuff.
Is there any reason why we don't allow a large scale?
I think at the Luso committee, we thought that the large scale probably was too big. That's like real commercial size for the town, but that's the reason.
That's more than 2 acres.
2 acres doesn't sound very big to me, but
I think it sounds big to the town of Reserve.
But that's the reason why.
I've got 2 questions.
Sure.
I've always been curious about the exemptions for chimneys and television antenna, and now we've got an exemption for the roof mounted solar energy systems.
Yep.
But like the wording that are allowed at a higher maximum height, how is that higher maximum height? Is there like a upper limit, like,
What are you talking about?
well,
What do you mean?
Height
what's,
standards?
yeah, for a roof
Height
mounted,
requirement.
Yeah, so what's the high end?
The
The,
peak.
no, not the peak, but it says the roof mounted solar energy system shall be considered similar to chimneys, television antennae. And other appurtenances that are allowed a higher maximum height. How do you determine that higher maximum height for those elements that are exempt from the,
Higher. I guess I don't know. Only inland zoning allows. With conditional use.
yeah,
To exceed the 40-foot height limitation, but you cannot exceed the 35-foot height limitation in the shoreline zone.
but what happens if my chimney is 60 feet tall?
Your chimney's exempt,
Yeah, what happens if my solar mounted roof array is
they're exempt.
60 feet tall?
They're not gonna be, but
Yeah,
that's kind of crazy. These roof mounted, from what I've seen,
yeah, no,
roof mounted solar arrays just kind of sit up a little bit. They don't, that's no big height to them.
mhm,
Yeah,
In most of the model ordinances, I will say, like, they are pushing for even small scale ground mounted solar energy systems to be
Yeah.
allowed by. Right, so that you wouldn't even need a permit for any of that, so this is a pretty standard thing, but I think. Your point, Bill, is how do you determine like how high is too high for a chimney or an antenna or something like that?
yeah, dude, must have been some bump in the road somewhere.
to add those, you mean,
Yeah. I've always wondered about like, what's that far upper limit then for the exclusions?
Well, wouldn't you consider wind and wind speed and things like that?
Oh.
There goes.
Oh,
over
yeah,
the
I'm
course
sure
of a
there's
roof.
design parameters, but what about the guy who wants the ham radio antenna on top of his? That's,
actually, I think that was added because of the antenna that was added to the elementary school for the police department.
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah, currently, those are not calculated in height measurements.
And just one other question, so the roof mounted solar array systems are permitted without a permit in all districts? What about when you're tying into like the established electrical system in the house? I mean, does an electrician have to file for a electrical permit to do that?
Commercial.
Really?
Town of Mount Desert doesn't have electrical permits for residential, it's only for commercial, through the state of Maine.
Well, you're not gonna get hooked up to Versant unless Versant allows, Versant approves it, whether it's in our ordinance or not.
Mhm.
So on page 3, number 3, there are some standards there for
Right.
roof mounted and small scale ground mounted solar energy systems that sort of. Even though Kim might not be the one issuing a permit, but there are sort of things that you have to follow up with,
Yeah,
like. Prior to operation, electrical connections must be inspected by an electrician and or. State electrical inspector. It's not a typo.
Right.
Any connection to the public utility grid must be inspected by the appropriate public utility unless waived by the public utility, like those are all things you have to do.
are you guys gonna have like an inspection form or something, or?
We haven't thought about having people for them. Special,
Not that we need more forms, but
No, we don't.
where did the language of this come from again?
so we have a couple of different sources, they have a primary drive, but I think their primary source, which was. Something from Maine Audubon,
Mhm.
who has it's basically like a guide to standards for these types of things.
And this has changed considerably from the first draft that we saw. I think it's gotten much more streamlined and
Yeah.
hopefully more easily.
Yeah. So
Why,
part of it was like solar panels,
comprehended.
and you have people that, that companies that know how to install them, and homeowners are using them on their homes, and we want to try to make it easier for people to use that type of thing. And then the roof mounted one seems like an obvious, like, let's make that really easy, because you're just putting it on top of an existing structure which already has a permit. The second one was the small scale, the ground mounted ones, and there was some discussion about like, how do you site those on a property and where you site them? And should they be on the side, or can you allow them in front, or what's the things that you need to go through there for siting purposes?
Mhm.
And
Setback
then
requirements.
setbacks are applicable and those kinds of things, and
And they're
then,
considered structures.
yep, they are. And then on the medium scale ones, it's like, you know, those are bigger in nature, more likely to take up a lot more land area. Those should probably come to the planning board. If they do, what additional information is nice to point out to an applicant that the planning board might find helpful in reviewing those things for conditional use.
And that's
And
on page
then
4.
some standards associated with that. So those would be the
Mhm.
things, and I think you're gonna have to like get an application probably to really figure out if we need to make some tweaks to it, but those standards and those things that are required are like pretty standard site plan stuff. And then the standards are this stuff we pulled right out of the model. I will admit, I am not an expert on solar energy systems, so I do know how it fits into the ordinance, but
Mhm.
And you, are you, you're gonna add fencing to.
yep, we're gonna add fencing to the
To the
So
site.
the list of site plan requirements if
Yeah.
it's proposed, and then just trying to figure out what the difference between a 1 year or 365 days is.
Right.
And then I just found a typo on
Yes, you did,
or
yeah.
twice, so. And Andy hasn't read it yet, so there may be some.
He has or hasn't?
I sent it to him, but he hasn't commented on it yet.
Oh, that's a broad potential add to the Lazo. It's great.
I mean, I think it's something that people were asking for, and also like it's happening, so you wanna think about it.
Definitely.
There are plenty of communities who want to have, sort of get out ahead of this issue. I mean, there are plenty of communities who don't want large. Solar.
Yeah.
And this community does not seem like a likely candidate for taking up huge acres of land.
Yeah, I'm not.
Fields
thinking
of,
business.
I mean, we don't want a lot of trees cut anyway in order to, we're not saying you can't cut any trees, but, clearing of natural vegetation should be limited to what is necessary for the construction, operation, and maintenance of ground mounted solar systems. Removal of mature trees should be avoided to the extent possible. Shall minimize mowing to the extent practical. No primary agricultural soil with significant volume of topsoil should be removed. So.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. This one's gonna be fun.
Yes,
So it's not,
last, but
actually,
at least.
Clarifications to section 6A.
yeah. Oh my God, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, we ran that
Whole day
for like-
talking about that. All right. I'm gonna give you the simplified version of what's happening, and then we're gonna dive into the details. So for this, what you're seeing on this page may end up actually being 2 different warrant articles. But the impetus behind the review was that the state recently passed some updates in their legislation related to manufactured homes, which we're, in our current ordinance standards, we're talking about mobile homes. So I'm trying to give you the 101 and then we'll get into kind of the details. The way that currently the town actually has some standards for mobile home parks, I think it is. If that's the ordinance that was adopted back in the 70s, maybe. And so that we have to look at. And starting from the beginning, this new state law related to mobile homes requires that all mobile homes are allowed on any lot where a single family dwelling is allowed. And so we needed to review our ordinance to make sure that we're applicable, the new law, we're in compliance with the new state laws. So, in doing so, we went back and found that the existing mobile home ordinance is not actually in compliance with that, so we're gonna have to repeal that ordinance. That's not what you have in front of you, because I have to talk to Andy about how to write that and what I'm supposed to do, whether or not we need to retype the ordinance, because it doesn't actually exist anywhere except for in Ken's records. Um, So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, what the simple thing that we're gonna be talking about tonight is, in order to be compliant with the state rules. The current land use ordinance really deals with mobile homes in two sections. One is 6B12. And then the other one is 6B14. So let's talk about 6B12 first, and then we'll talk about 6B14. So 6B12.
Can we, I'm trying to interrupt you because before I get to that, I'm confused by the definitions of those things. And they're in 810, 811. And I don't understand where the difference is. Mobile home, temporary or older type. Any dwelling capable of being lived in by humans on a permanent basis, which was originally designed with the capacity of being moved from time to time over public streets and highways. This includes temporary or older type mobile homes which do not meet the specifications of manufactured homes, large capitals as defined above. And then you go to manufactured homes. A structural unit or units designed to be used as a dwelling or dwellings and constructed in a manufacturing facility and then transported by the use of its own chassis or placement on an independent chassis to a building site. The term includes any type of building that is constructed at a manufacturing facility and then transported to a building site where it is utilized for housing and may be purchased, sold, offered for sale, or brokered by a licensee in the interim. I don't because we're gonna be talking about these two different types. And I don't understand the clean difference between these. The mobile home temporary or older type talks about not meeting the specifications of manufactured homes. And then I don't see the specifications for manufactured homes in the definition of manufactured homes, or no reference to it in the definition of manufactured homes. So I'm not sure what we have already, so that I can then feel like I'm semi-intelligently talking about what we're trying to do.
Okay. So,
Section 7. In the ordinance talks about manufactured homes. Remember that 5.5, is that 5.3? I think.
so if we're just talking about definitions. There is no definition of mobile home in the ordinance.
Okay,
There is
Other
only
than
the
that.
definition of manufactured homes / housing.
In there?
And then there's a definition of mobile home, temporary or older type. Which I think we can probably do.
tiny ones.
So,
Fine,
is that,
But what I'm saying is there is a definition of mobile homes. And that's temporary or older type.
right, but we're gonna end up probably deleting that. And just combining them into this one definition that's in these proposed lists.
Okay, I just might help to understand truly understand what we have now before I talk about.
So what we have now for manufactured homes / housing is actually the first. Basically the first paragraph of the proposed definition. And then all of the additional stuff starts with, for the purposes of this ordinance, there are two types of manufactured homes. So we're making it, this change is basically what they say in state law. Which is there are two types of manufactured homes, there's mobile homes. And then there are two kinds of mobile homes, the newer ones and the older ones. And then there's something called a modular home. So manufactured homes are basically anything that you kind of deliver, that's kind of pre-built somewhere else and you deliver onto a property. Mobile homes actually have wheels. And modular homes are basically just trucked in and placed on the property. Simply, that's a simple explanation.
So we're gonna be replacing those definitions I just read with
Yes,
section 8 definitions, which do clarify what older and newer.
correct,
That would be helpful, because they don't.
yes.
That's a
So
selling.
the only thing that I missed here today is adding the straight through of the older mobile home.
Yes.
older manufacturing.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. But point of 6B12 is that in the past, the town has already allowed mobile homes. Because it's part of the definition of dwelling unit or residential, whatever dwelling unit. But that there are a set of standards that are required for mobile homes. And this proposal basically just takes that out. The state law does allow towns to add standards that are kind of similar to what is here. We would have to,
We could restrict it, but then-
nope, you cannot. And this one, I don't think you can be stricter. I think you have to, because what the state law says actually is. You can add design standards as long as they aren't meant to make it so that you can't have mobile homes. Essentially. So I don't think you can be much stricter than what the state is saying you could do, but you could add standards for pitched roofs and. You know, making sure that your siding is. Residential in nature or those kinds of things, whatever the state law says, but when we discussed it at the Luso committee meeting, we thought, you know what? This standard probably doesn't mean anything right now, why don't we just take it out? So that's the proposal for 6B12, and I'm keeping the word reserved. Because in the future, which we can talk about after, because I think we're gonna have to add standards back into the ordinance for mobile home parks and those kinds of things, but that's a whole different, that's it. Let's hold that discussion for the end.
I think the discussion we had about that 6B12 is that we don't require those sorts of standards for any other type of dwelling. And we didn't want to get into being a design review
Right,
entity,
You,
especially for just one type.
just a definition thing, do you have to have cooking, toilet and sleeping facilities to be considered a residential dwelling unit? And if you have two of the three, you're not.
What would you have, yeah,
My neighbor had way back when. Yeah, I won't go there. He had two of.
that's typically how we think about it. Also, in this one, to relate it to this change, I did add. Because there's no real definition of mobile homes, I added manufactured housing.
Mhm.
Maybe we have to do home slash housing, but let's tighten that up a little bit.
Is there a current time limit on habitation of like RVs or
you can't use an RV for
you can't?
residential purposes, no. Not a dwelling unit.
What was there?
There's individual private campsites that you can move RVs, and then
Yeah.
there's one under 6B14, when if a house is under construction.
Yeah,
Or you're putting in a new house, you can be on your lawn in an RV for 90 days.
that was
But that's for the person who's actually constructing or renovating
That's
their own house,
correct.
house, not.
It's not just a throwing on your property and have it. for
you
90
can't
days.
have someone living on your property in an RV.
Right.
Mhm.
Well,
It's not a dwelling.
for a certain period of time, you can.
Well, if
have
you do an
an
individual private
private campsite.
An individual private campsite.
Yeah,
But if you do an individual private campsite, you gotta meet the dimensional requirements for the house and for the individual private campsite.
yeah, it's whatever's in section 6B9.
Mhm.
Every year older this year. I can't see anymore.
Got it.
So, does it make sense? Let's just focus on 6B12. Does that proposed change make sense?
Reserving it, deleting it,
Yep,
At least.
delete it and then
Yes.
just reserve,
yes.
okay? And I promise I'll start to get better at explaining all these things the closer we get to actual funds. All right, so 6B14. I would say that this change doesn't actually, the proposed changes don't change the existing policy of this section. It just clarifies the things that are what we're talking about essentially. So if you see, if the policy here is you can't use, certain structures like temporary or older mobile homes, campers, trailers, or other recreational vehicles for permanent habitation. So essentially, it has to do with, so the beginning part, we have to do a couple of things. One, we have to delete the temporary or older mobile homes because the state law says we have to allow them as habitation. And number two, there's no definition for camper, trailer, or and so we have to delete those and just use recreational vehicles, because that's the defined term in the ordinance. So we're just clarifying that recreational vehicles aren't allowed to be used for habitation unless they're in a campground or individual private campsite, which we just talked about.
Mhm.
But then the ordinance says, however, we recognize that sometimes when you're building something, you need a place to stay for a short time, and we can give you a temporary permit for that. So you can use your recreational vehicle for a temporary living space if you get a permit from the kid, but only for 90 days, period. And so the second part really is, we're just taking out, again, those references to modular homes or other things that aren't defined in the ordinance.
So the first one that we crossed out, the temporary or older mobile home. Those are now allowed,
Yes, well, they have to be.
even if they're before. And by temporary or older, we are meaning before there were standards for the construction of those.
Yeah.
So what is that? And so we've been using those standards and those, but if we are gonna allow something that's built before those standards, what standards are we requiring for older mobile homes that get moved onto a lot? And how are they different than, are they the same standards you require?
They're worrisome, actually. I mean, I'm shocked that she would allow them. Dan Mills, I mean,
Well, it's the legislature that passed the bill.
well, that too, but
So that-
I'm just surprised because some of them are, you know. They don't have proper egress. You know, who knows what kind of heating systems.
Wouldn't that come under your occupancy permit that you could look in? So someone with an older mobile home doesn't need to meet the occupancy permit requirements that
There's
someone that built
nothing- No, because it's coming as is, if you will. And if they're not doing anything to it, I can't make them bring it up to code. As I see it.
I think what we're saying is you could use an older mobile home as your house, and you might still need to get a permit to put it on the lot.
You do. But
And so you're still getting a building permit, just like you
I mean,
would.
because you're gonna still connect to sewer, septic, whatever that is there. You gotta connect the plumbing that may be in it, has to be in it. To, a building sewer line. Or building drain,
But safety standards, health and safety standards?
I don't, if they do nothing to it, I don't believe I can.
But aren't occupancy permits the basis of safety for a dwelling? And it doesn't seem to make sense.
It
that
is.
You couldn't look at the.
Well,
safety
again,
system.
this goes back to when they're gonna be, were required.
I mean, back to when that older mobile home was manufactured.
No, when the town of Mount Desert started required occupancies.
But if they've moved an old mobile home to a new location, wouldn't.
But if they do nothing to it, how, they're not. I can't make them do something to it.
Well, what they did is they brought it onto a new lot. And they're asking for a permit to be on that lot. That
Yep.
feels like a new dwelling situation.
Like a
that
different
You would
kind
need
of
to
new
make sure
construction.
it's safe.
Nothing's, I mean, I can't see any wiring, I can't see any plumbing, it's all done. They're just like bringing it in and just plopping, kind of like manufactured homes.
What about
I
the
don't see
heating
the
system?
plumbing. I don't see the plumbing.
Connections
It's all done, all
to,
they do is connect it to a sewer, or it's all plumbed down to the floor,
is
in the
there,
floor.
is
And
there,
that's why you have those standards, the manufactured and or modular homes that are complied with the Manufactured Housing Act,
Correct.
right?
there's inspection of the connections?
I have to look at the, yeah, internal plumbing connection and septic, and or sewer.
And there's
Neighborhood
nobody to
restrictions.
inspect this, the heating system in an
What the-
older,
What the law says is municipalities may not prohibit manufactured housing regardless of its date of manufacture solely on the basis of a date of manufacture before June 14, 1976, or the failure of a unit to have been manufactured in accordance with the National Manufactured Housing Construction and Safety Act standards of 1974. United States Code, Title 42, Chapter 70, municipalities may apply design standards permitted in this section to all manufactured housing regardless of the date of manufacture, and may apply reasonable safety standards to manufactured housing built before 1976,
Pretty broad.
but not built in accordance with the manufactured housing, blah, blah, blah.
Like if they don't have a smoke detector, say you gotta put a smoke
But
detector.
you don't have those codes in your ordinance. You just go back to when you apply for a building permit, you have to meet certain life safety standards. But those codes are not specifically in the ordinance right now.
right? But you still have to meet them.
Or you still
When
have
you're
to meet
building
it
a- when
with
you're building a home?
permit, a new building permit.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you got a brand new, obviously you gotta meet. what the
but if
codes
you're
are.
renovating, you
If you're
know,
renovating, that's a yes, I can make.
you have to do that too.
Can make them do stuff if they renovate.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk to Andy about this too, but I don't know that even now, like. If you had an older mobile home, it's still, what this section says is you can't use it as a temporary, you can't use older mobile homes for human habitation. Unless it's in a campground, but we can't do that. We have to take that out.
Sure.
So now we just have to figure out if we need to add more different standards.
Well, there certainly is language in there about health and safety and stuff like that. I mean, those would be some of the significant concerns, it seems to me. You get an older, much older unit, you put it there, and what kind of heating system does it have? What kind of
Electric.
electrical, what, you know, the quality of the electrical system? I mean, it's not new construction, but it is in a way. I mean, it's a weird hybrid.
I guess if I just decided to live in a camp that was built in the 1950s. And not do anything to it, it's the same thing. I get what you're saying, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, like, the purpose of these changes, there's a lot more to this mobile home thing that we need to do.
So if there's a camp that on one of the lakes here that wasn't winterized or anything like that, and you decided to live there,
Yep.
There's-
With stove in it,
as long as it's hooked up to the plumbing and
Mhm.
it can be done. I think I've done that. Not here, but.
I think there's a valid concern, so what we're trying to do in the law, the intent of the law changes was to make it so that these are legitimate forms of housing.
Right,
For people that need housing that is affordable,
yes,
and
Yes,
we
yes.
cannot discriminate against that type of housing in this community, or any community. So we
Right.
have to, and now what we need to do
And
is
that's a
figure
good
out,
goal.
okay. What are the reasonable things that we need to do, because like there is a reasonable concern that, you know. You're gonna be in an unsafe place, so we're trying to balance out all of those different factors. I think my suggestion would be, like, what I'm thinking of, these are like 3 different discussions, so the first one is. Are we okay with taking out the design standards under 6B12, which we just agreed to? The second one is, does 6B14, really the point of 6B14 was to say. We don't want you we don't want you to turn your RV into a house. It can be longer on a property if it's an individual private campsite, we have standards for that. And so
Yes, so-
let's just clarify what the real purpose of 6B14 is.
right.
And then the third thing we need to talk about, and we're not gonna get to it this year, but we need to work on it, is, hey. Mobile homes are a legitimate form of housing. We're not very good at we're not great at our standards for that right now, so we need to start talking more about what is the rule, what are the rules and the law say? And how do we integrate them in between our land use ordinance and our subdivision ordinance, because there are standards for mobile home parks,
Mhm.
which are also kind of separate from a mobile home subdivision. And so we need to start working on getting those that terminology better, more up to date, and how it fits in with our overall kind of housing objectives. And that to me is a bit bigger, a bit longer of a conversation, and I'm not up to speed enough on it to really give you good advice.
Are you suggesting that we still do the change to the definition of manufactured homes and housing?
I do think you should do that, yes.
Okay,
So my suggestion would be, so what I've suggested is we maybe want to consider splitting these into two separate warrant articles, because they're really two separate policy discussions. And then one of them, we need to change the definition just to be more comprehensive than the one that we have. Because it really is nice to clarify that manufactured homes do include modular homes, but what is a modular home? And then I kept this down here in yellow because like the new state law actually does have a different definition of mobile home park, so maybe we do that. And then the dwelling unit one, I just clarified that we're not talking about mobile homes, we're talking about manufactured homes. Are actually considered residential dwelling units. Because modular homes are the same thing, because it's manufactured home, and we have plenty of those around.
right.
And then the other thing we might need to do that I just haven't added is to delete the term older manufactured homes. Because,
Or older mobile homes.
yeah, because it's in there and I forgot to add it.
Right.
So what happens when you buy your lot and you get your foundation in the ground, you're waiting for your manufactured home to show up? And it takes more than 90 days and you're living in your RV.
We'll have to go somewhere else.
That's currently the policy now.
Yeah.
So we're not actually changing the policy, I'm just clarifying like these, it's really, we're talking about RVs.
Mhm.
Because we can't talk about the other thing. And and I would also say like. There's no definition of camper, so what do you mean by a camper? It's really an RV, like those terms are covered in the recreational vehicle definition, so you don't need that.
Or you get your campsite permitted.
You can do that.
Yeah.
Yep,
Or you go to a campground.
Mhm.
Right.
but the point of the individual private campsite is to allow somebody to be like, hey, I have an RV, maybe I want to be able to. Allow my family to come and stay there, but if you're gonna be there for a while, you have to hook up to septic system.
Is there a time limit for that?
I think it's like, oh, if you're there for longer than,
120 days.
yeah, I
Yeah.
can't remember, but there is a longer time period. And that isn't, I think that's not even not desert rule, I think that's probably like a state rule that I can't remember, why we came up with that number.
That number? No, that's,
That's a state rule, right?
that's state.
Yeah, we didn't just make that up.
But keep in mind, if you apply for the individual private campsite and you're building a house, you gotta meet the dimensional requirements times two. Inland, shoreline is different.
Mhm.
So if you have a 1 acre zoning, you need 2 acres. If you don't have two, then you can't have an individual private campsite. If you have a house on the property.
When we talked yesterday about. Mobile home or manufactured home subdivisions.
Yep.
It brought up the subject of working next year, which we won't be dealing with. This year, but it brought up the need to deal with this kind of concept. Which hopefully we can fold into getting back to. The subdivision, the rewrite of the subdivision ordinance for next year, so I don't know if you'll have time in your agenda with Andy.
We're gonna do that. I think it's important
Yeah,
I mean,
that we get that started again.
needs to settle out, but the subdivision ordinance could use it this, as we talked about before.
Yeah,
And I do think it would help us to go through, particularly with support from the comprehensive plan. To just clarify, to be more clear that. You want to allow conservation. Developments, or you want to allow workforce housing developments, one of them could be one and one could be the other, or they could be the same,
Right.
there's a lot of. Ways to do it, and so the subdivision is your tool to do a lot of that stuff.
And speaking of that, with respect to the manufactured homes, why would we need separate subdivision rules? We talked about that last night. They, if we change the state law and the state, or the state laws changed and we have to allow those sorts of homes everywhere. Why, we just still use the subdivision ordinance, however it's written. But you can put modular or mobile homes on them.
Yes, you can do that already,
Right,
yep. I think the difference is when you think about a traditional like mobile home park.
Yeah.
There's
it's smaller.
It's smaller, so you're allowing more density on that, on a smaller area, and those mobile home lots are not the same thing as like a traditional lot.
Right,
Cause that's development, that's not by structures, dwelling units, it's not lots.
Yeah, but I mean, that's part of the reason I wanna kind of get educated on this a little bit, to say like, if you did 3 mobile homes on a single lot, isn't that the same thing as doing 3 apartment buildings? 3 apartment units,
Three
which
dwellings.
would technically require subdivision.
Well,
So,
not necessarily,
Because
because.
it's typically one owner of the land.
no, but you
Right.
still need, if I own an apartment building, if I build
Yeah,
an
but
apartment building.
If it's all in one building, that's multi dwellings.
You're
Three or
not
more.
subdividing.
It's
And if you
still
do trailers, they're individual, single family dwellings.
It's 3 or more lots or dwelling units.
I understand that,
And
but
so if I
I'm
did-
saying what you used as an example.
If I did a 3-unit apartment building, it still needs subdivision.
I know, but I'm saying that's multi-family,
Yes,
and then the trailers are individual, single family dwellings.
right,
That's what
but
I'm just
you don't
saying.
think that needs subdivision approval?
No, I do,
Okay.
I do,
I think we're saying the
absolutely,
same thing.
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's again, it's a legitimate and affordable form of home ownership that is gonna be maybe an important tool in the toolkit for the town of Mount Desert to help address the housing need that we have. And we just wanna make sure that we're doing it the way that we're supposed to be doing it, in a way that works for the town of Mount Desert. And so I'm not comfortable just saying, here's what you need to do, because I don't understand it enough yet.
so we talked about issues last night, like. And currently in the subdivision ordinance, we don't allow, a single septic system that everybody hooks into. And why would we wanna rethink that?
Right, that's another thing to think about, is that the current rules don't allow you to do shared septic systems
I think that's by lots, so,
by lot.
I think it's a subdivision by lots.
Seems weird. Somehow, like, they should be
Anyway,
able to
that's
do a shared
more
septic
fun for
system
the future.
and have like a lot that is your septic lot, and then have a bunch of individual lots. So, I mean, I bring this all up because, again, by way of like, part of what we're gonna be doing, even through the comprehensive plan, and part of what you could be doing as a planning board, and part of what we could be doing through the land use ordinance committee, is really looking at the tools that we have available to us to help with our housing challenges, and those are things that, like, we don't think about until it's too late, and so we might want to be a little more proactive about saying, hey, maybe we should make this, this doesn't really make sense, or at least asking the question, what was the policy objective behind that thing? And does it still make sense?
Hmm.
Yeah, because I will say, and I'm not gonna get this right, but we just finished a housing study for all of the towns in the kind of League of Towns area, and not the same thing that the Hancock County Planning Commission did, but more. And that's what I think one of the conclusions was, is that right now, we're gonna need like at least 500 homes in this area, and just to keep the population that's here now. So that's not even like all of the demand that we have for homes, like just to like maintain the current population, we're gonna need to build like at least 500 homes.
Is that because there's 500 homes that'll be displaced by seasonal?
Some of that and some of it's like, yeah, it's like what's happening in the market. And I have to read a little bit more about it. We just got the report, but I found it, that was like one of the things that kind of popped out at me. We'll be talking about that more. But it's sort of like the housing, we're doing a housing, it's not a demand study, it's like building on how many houses do we actually need in this area? And it's like one of the cuts.
This area being MBI,
Is it what?
this area meaning MBI.
Ellsworth to,
Oh.
here.
Well, Ellsworth, that's assuming Ellsworth isn't growing, which of course we know is not the case, but Ellsworth also has a huge amount of changeover to seasonal.
So that's like other questions that we could be asking are like, when we're doing some of these new rules, you know, is the rule set up to help the policy or is it set up to just let anybody do it? You know? So not necessarily do we put caps on short-term rentals or any of that, so we're just not having that conversation, but if we're allowing like greater density, maybe that's, you know, the offsetting thing is, you know, it has to be used for a certain thing as opposed to a certain other thing. Just conversations to have.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
don't
guess
think-
you'd count me among the people who wouldn't be interested in trying to increase density if it was not gonna increase opportunity for people to live here.
Right.
I'm not interested in just more, I personally not interested in just more short-term rentals. But that's me, I'm just speaking as an individual.
Sure, and I think we're in a, this is the great, we're gonna be having those conversations over the next year.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's important for you guys on the planning board too, just like, keep that in mind as you're going through applications or things that you're reading the ordinance and wondering like, God, this doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, or, you know, how do we, you know, part of the Luso committee's objective is to continue to try to make it, the ordinance, you know, easy to the degree that you can. Although my argument continues to be sometimes like less words doesn't make things easier, it actually makes it more complicated.
Correct.
But we just need to like continue to think about that. So this year, I think we're getting a, for Luso changes at town meeting, it's a pretty small and not super controversial set of changes. I think.
One never knows.
Yeah. But we're gonna be coming up with some bigger policy questions, I think, next year or so. Kind of exciting, I think.
It's about time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do you have any questions?
That's it, we're done.
Noel.
Unless you have
He's
questions?
done. This meeting, you're done.
Good work.
Thanks, it's a team effort,
It is.
very huge.
Did I ask? Go
Sorry,
ahead.
because I'm not done. What I will end with is that we're meeting with Andy, and there may be some tweaks to the things that you just saw, but on principle, like. What you're gonna see on the 12th, what we're gonna talk about on the 12th is this, exactly these things, so. Hopefully it won't be a surprise.
Yeah, there won't be any last minute initiatives.
Yeah.
So is there any other? We have applications for,
You do, so far you got one, submission deadline date is tomorrow. We got a
is the one,
review structure coming before you, which you're gonna have to abstain from.
yeah,
And then the Luso, amendment proposals, public hearing.
mhm.
When's the last meeting in February?
26.
What's the deadline for that?
Off the top of my head.
So we did the public hearing, just public comment on that, and then the peer on 12.
So far, I don't know if something's coming in tomorrow.
Well, I'm sorry we didn't have a site visit today.
Yeah,
On the shore.
I know you didn't have anything on the agenda, we could have arranged something.
no, thanks, Noel.
One on the 12th on the water, so maybe February 12th is gonna be nice and icy cold too.
Yeah,
I have my normal long walkout
Yeah,
every day.
bring your crampons.
Cold.
Mhm. Oh, well, since there is no other, item 4 is adjournment.
I moved to adjourn.
Second,
All those in favor?
I.
Aye. Opposed? There you go.